My first night operating the Whitecap Mountain cable cars alone. The previous operator, Sarah, handed me a laminated card before practically running to her car. Follow these exactly after midnight, she said. The rules were: 1. If cabin 13 starts moving on its own, don't stop it. 2. When you hear knocking from inside stationary cabins, ignore it. 3. If the emergency phone rings between 3 and 4 a.m., don't answer. 4. Should you see passengers in vintage clothing, log them as maintenance crew. 5. Never ride in any cabin alone after dark. 6. If the cables start moving backward, lock yourself in the office until dawn. I thought Sarah was hazing me until 3 a.m. when all 6 rules triggered at once. Cabin 13 started its descent, while cabins 4 through 11 shook with knocking from inside. The emergency phone rang non-stop as the cables began running in reverse, and through it all I could see them. Dozens of passengers from different decades, all riding in cabins that security cameras showed as empty. My name is Marcus Webb, and I need to tell you everything about what really happens at Whitecap Mountain Resort after the tourists go home. I took this job in early November, just before ski season, because the pay was exceptional, and I desperately needed the isolation after my divorce. Running cable cars seemed like the perfect mindless work to help me process the wreckage of my personal life. The resort sits 40 miles outside of Denver, Colorado, nestled in a valley that's beautiful during the day, but becomes something else entirely after dark. The job posting had been straightforward enough: operate and monitor the cable car system during night shifts, perform basic maintenance, ensure all safety protocols were followed. What it didn't mention was the turnover rate. I would later learn that Whitecap Mountain had gone through 17 operators in the last 5 years. Most lasted less than a month. The longest anyone had stayed was Tommy Hendricks at 2 years, and he'd ended up in a psychiatric facility, speaking only about the passengers who never got off. Sarah Brennan met me at 4 p.m. on a gray Monday afternoon. She was supposed to train me for a full week, but after showing me the basics in about 3 hours, she was clearly desperate to leave. Her hands shook constantly, and she kept glancing at the cables as if expecting them to start moving on their own. She was probably 40, with premature gray streaking through her brown hair and dark circles under her eyes that suggested chronic insomnia. The system runs from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. during operating season, she explained, her words coming out in a rapid stream. 62 cabins total, each holds 8 passengers max. Everything's computerized now. The spacing, the speed, the loading. Your job is mainly monitoring. The control room was a glass-enclosed space that looked like an air traffic control tower, giving a clear view of the entire cable system. Through the windows, I could see the massive steel cables stretching up the mountain for nearly 3 miles, disappearing into low-hanging clouds at the summit. The cabins hung like colorful ornaments, red, blue, yellow, green, swaying gently in the mountain wind. Each one was numbered in large white digits on the side. This is the main control panel, Sarah continued, gesturing at a wall of monitors and switches that looked like something from NASA. These screens show every cabin's position in real time. This one displays weight distribution. This one shows wind speed at different elevations. And this one, she paused, pointing at a monitor that was turned off. This one's broken, has been for years. I noticed that the broken monitor had fresh fingerprints on the power button, as if someone had recently tried to turn it on. What about overnight? I asked. I assume the system shuts down? Mostly, yes. But there are automatic maintenance cycles to prevent ice buildup. The computer runs empty cabins every few hours, totally normal. She said this while avoiding eye contact, staring instead at something over my shoulder. She showed me the rest of the facility with increasing speed, the massive motor room where the main bull wheels turned the cables, the backup generator system, the maintenance bay where damaged cabins could be pulled off the line for repairs. The maintenance bay held 6 cabins in various states of disrepair, their doors removed, windows cracked, some with their bench seats torn out completely. "These are waiting for repairs?" I asked. "They've been waiting for years," Sarah said. "Company never approves the budget, but sometimes." She trailed off, then shook her head. "Never mind." The employee quarters were attached to the base station, a small but comfortable apartment with a kitchenette, bathroom, and bedroom. The windows looked directly out at the loading platform where tourists would normally queue during the day. At night, it was just an empty concrete space lit by harsh sodium lights. "You'll be alone here most nights," Sarah said. "Maintenance crew comes in the morning around 5:30, but from 10 p.m. to 5:30 a.m., it's just you. What about emergencies?" "There won't be any emergencies." The way she said it sounded more like a prayer than a statement of fact. That's when she pulled out the laminated card. "These are additional protocols," she said, her hand shaking worse than before. "They're not in the official manual, but they're important. More important than anything in the manual, actually." I read through the 6 rules, trying to keep my expression neutral. The rational part of my mind immediately categorized this as some kind of hazing ritual or practical joke. Cable cars don't move on their own. Empty cabins don't have passengers knocking from inside. These were the kinds of stories teenagers told around campfires. "Sarah," I said gently, "is this serious? Are you feeling okay?" She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, her nails digging into my skin. "Do I look like I'm joking? Do I look okay to you?" Her eyes were wild, desperate. "I've been here 3 months. 3 months of this every single night. The guy before me, Tommy, he tried to tell people what happens here. They put him in a mental hospital. The woman before him, Rita, she just disappeared, left everything behind. Her car, her clothes, her dog at the employee housing, just gone. What happens here? After midnight, the mountain remembers things, events that happened, people who died, moments that got stuck somehow. They replay every night between midnight and dawn. The cable cars are part of it. They run routes that shouldn't be possible, carry passengers who aren't there or aren't there anymore." She let go of my wrist, leaving red marks where her nails had been. "Look, I know how it sounds. I didn't believe it either when Rita tried to warn me. But after your first night, you'll understand. Just follow the rules exactly. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to investigate. Just survive until dawn." She practically ran to her car after that, leaving me standing in the control room, holding the laminated card and wondering what I'd gotten myself into. But the pay was too good to walk away from, nearly double what I'd made at my previous job. And I needed the money for lawyer fees and starting over. My first 3 nights were completely normal. I monitored the empty cable cars during their automatic maintenance runs, did equipment checks, read a book, caught up on Netflix on my laptop. The isolation was exactly what I'd wanted. Just me, the mountains, and the mechanical hum of massive machinery. The cables would groan occasionally in the wind, and the cabins would sway, but nothing supernatural happened. I began to think Sarah had been suffering from some kind of breakdown, maybe cabin fever from being alone too long. On the 4th night, November 15th, everything changed. I was in the control room at 11:30 p.m., going through my routine checklist. The weather was clear but cold, about 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the snowy slopes. The cabins hung motionless on their cables, the system having shut down at 10 p.m. as scheduled, according to the computer. The next automatic maintenance cycle wasn't until 2 a.m. At exactly midnight, and I mean exactly, down to the second according to the atomic clock on the wall, cabin 13 started moving. The motors hadn't turned on. The emergency backup hadn't engaged. According to every sensor and system in the control room, the entire cable car system was powered down and stationary. But through the window, I could clearly see cabin 13 descending from the summit station, moving at the normal operational speed of about 12 miles per hour. I reached for the emergency stop button, my training taking over. Then I remembered the first rule. If cabin 13 starts moving on its own, don't stop it. I grabbed the binoculars instead and focused on the moving cabin. The windows were fogged from the inside, which made no sense. It was below freezing outside, and the cabin had been hanging empty for hours. Any moisture inside should have been frozen solid on the windows, but this looked like fresh condensation, like warm breath on cold glass. As cabin 13 passed under one of the tower lights, I saw shapes inside, dark silhouettes of what looked like 5 or 6 people, sitting upright on the benches. They weren't moving, just sitting perfectly still, facing forward like mannequins. I checked the security monitor for cabin 13. It showed the interior clearly, completely empty. I looked back through the binoculars. The silhouettes were still there. My hands started shaking as I tracked the cabin's descent. It passed Tower 8, then 7, then 6, getting closer to the base station where I sat. As it approached, I could see more details. The condensation on the windows had patterns in it, not random fog, but what looked like writing, as if someone had drawn letters in the moisture with their finger. I enhanced the binocular focus and felt my blood turn to ice. The condensation spelled out, Avalanche Sector 7, January 15, 1978, help us. With trembling fingers, I pulled up the resort's digital archives on the computer. It took me less than a minute to find the incident report. January 15, 1978, a massive avalanche had struck Sector 7 of the mountain during a training run. The Whitecap Mountain Racing Team, 5 young skiers and their coach, had been caught in the slide, but the report said they'd been on the slopes when it happened. I kept reading and found a detail that made my stomach drop. The team had been in cable car 13 trying to descend when the avalanche hit the mid-mountain station. The impact had knocked the cabin off its cable, and it had been buried under tons of snow. By the time rescue crews dug them out 6 hours later, all 6 occupants had frozen to death. They'd been trapped in a metal box, slowly freezing, probably watching through the windows as snow buried them deeper and deeper. The silhouettes in cabin 13 numbered exactly 6. The cabin was now approaching the base station. I could hear the mechanism engaging, the wheels turning to bring it into the loading area, even though I could see on the control panel that no power was running to those systems. It was like watching a ghost ship dock itself. Cabin 13 glided into the loading area and stopped smoothly in the exact position for passengers to disembark. The doors remained closed. Through the fogged windows, the 6 silhouettes sat perfectly still. I waited, not sure what was supposed to happen next. Sarah's rules said, don't stop it, but they didn't say what to do when it arrived. My every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the control room and away from whatever was in that cabin. But I was also transfixed, unable to look away. After exactly 5 minutes, I watched the clock the entire time. One of the silhouettes moved. It stood up and walked to the door, then another. Then all 6 were standing, facing the door that wouldn't open. I heard something then that I'll never forget. Voices, muffled but audible, coming from inside cabin 13. Why won't it open? We're at the bottom, aren't we? Coach, the door's stuck. It's so cold. I can't feel my fingers anymore. Someone help us. Please, someone. The voices overlapped. Some young, teenagers probably, one older and authoritative. They were having the same conversation they'd probably had 45 years ago, trapped in that cabin as hypothermia set in. Then, as suddenly as it had started, cabin 13 began moving again. The doors never opened. The 6 figures sat back down in unison, returning to their original positions. The cabin rose back toward the summit, carrying its impossible passengers on a journey that I was beginning to understand they'd been taking every night for decades. As it ascended, the condensation on the windows cleared, and through the binoculars I could see the cabin was empty. Completely, utterly empty. But I knew that at midnight tomorrow, those same 6 figures would be back, trying once again to complete a journey that had ended in death 45 years ago. I logged the event as routine maintenance. Cabin 13, in the official record, my hand shaking as I wrote. Then I spent the next hour researching every death that had occurred on the Whitecap Mountain cable car system. What I found made me understand that Sarah's rules weren't paranoid delusions. They were survival instructions based on 45 years of documented patterns. Since the system opened in 1962, there had been 23 fatal incidents involving the cable cars. Not a huge number for 6 decades of operation, but enough to create what I was beginning to understand as a kind of supernatural ecosystem. Each death had left something behind, an impression or echo that replayed nightly between midnight and dawn. At 1 a.m., right on schedule, the knocking started in the maintenance bay. I walked to the bay windows and looked at the 6 damaged cabins stored inside. They sat on metal cradles, completely disconnected from any cables, doors removed, some with their floors torn out for repairs. There was absolutely no way anyone could be inside them. The knocking was rhythmic, deliberate. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks, pause. The universal pattern for SOS. It came from cabin 7, which according to my research had fallen from the cables during a severe ice storm on December 3, 1982. 4 passengers had been trapped inside when it plummeted 40 feet into a ravine. They'd survived the fall but died of hypothermia before rescue crews could reach them through the storm. The rescue report noted that they'd heard knocking for 6 hours before it finally stopped. The knocking spread to the other damaged cabins. Different rhythms, different patterns. Cabin 4 produced a frantic, continuous banging. Cabin 11 had a slow, weak tapping, like someone who was running out of strength. Each cabin that knocked had been involved in a fatal incident. Each one contained the echo of someone's final desperate attempt to escape. I grabbed my phone and recorded the knocking, thinking I'd have evidence to show someone. But when I played it back, all I heard was silence. The phone had recorded nothing, even though the knocking was loud enough to echo through the entire building. At 2 a.m., I watched through the control room windows as cabins 4 through 11 began swaying violently on their cables. Not all the cabins, just those specific ones. The wind was completely still. The weather station showed 0 miles per hour at all elevations. But these 8 cabins rocked back and forth like ships in a storm. I pulled up the records for each swaying cabin. Every single one had been involved in a fatality. Cabin 4, a heart attack victim in 1987 who died between stations. Cabin 5, a suicide in 1993. Someone had jumped while the cabin was in motion. Cabin 6, lightning strike in 1999 that killed 2 passengers instantly. The list went on. The cabins weren't just swaying. They were recreating their final traumatic moments. Cabin 6 jerked and sparked as if being struck by lightning again. Cabin 5 had one door swinging open repeatedly, mimicking the moment someone had jumped. They were all locked in their own loops of death, repeating the worst moment over and over. At 2:45 a.m., the emergency phone rang. The Summit Station phone line had been disconnected 3 years ago when they upgraded to digital radios. The phone in the control room wasn't even plugged in anymore. I could see the dead cable coiled on the desk, but it rang anyway. An old mechanical bell that hadn't sounded in years. I remembered Rule 3. If the emergency phone rings between 3 and 4 a.m., don't answer. But it was only 2:45. The rule said between 3 and 4. Maybe this was different. Maybe this was actually someone who needed help. I picked up the receiver. Static filled the line, then cleared to reveal a voice I recognized from old training videos. William Crenshaw, the night operator who died in 1991. "Control, this is Summit Station," he said, his voice thin and distorted. "We have a situation. 17 passengers missed the last regular run. The weather's turning bad. I need to bring them down now." I knew the story. March 19th, 1991. A sudden blizzard had trapped tourists at the summit. Crenshaw had tried to evacuate them using the cable cars despite severe wind warnings. Multiple cabins had derailed in the high winds. All 17 passengers and Crenshaw had died. "Mr. Crenshaw," I said, "you're dead. This happened 32 years ago." There was a long pause. Then, No, it's happening now. It's always happening now. Every night I try to save them. Every night we fall. But maybe tonight, maybe if you help me, we can change it. You could override the wind sensors from your console. Let me bring them down. You're asking me to repeat the same mistake that killed 18 people. They're dying up here." His voice cracked with desperation. "Can you hear them? 17 souls, freezing in the summit station. There are children, for God's sake. A baby. Please override the sensors. Let me try one more time." In the background, I could hear them, voices pleading, a baby crying, wind howling through broken windows. It sounded absolutely real. "I can't," I said. "You already tried. It already failed. You're all already dead." The line went silent for a moment. Then Crenshaw spoke again, but his voice had changed. It was flat, emotionless. "You're right. We're dead. We've been dead so long, but we can't stop trying. Every night at 3 a.m., I load them into the cabins. Every night, the wind tears us from the cables. Every night we fall, and every night we get back up and try again. Because what else can we do? We're responsible for them. I'm responsible." The line went dead. At exactly 3 a.m., all 6 rules triggered simultaneously. Cabin 13 began its descent from the summit, but this time it wasn't alone. Cabins 14 through 23 followed in a ghostly procession. Through the binoculars, I could see passengers in all of them. The 1978 ski team in cabin 13, the 1982 ice storm victims in cabin 14, the 1991 blizzard evacuees in cabins 15 through 20. Every person who had died on the mountain was riding down together. The knocking in the maintenance bay became violent, shaking the entire building. The damaged cabins rocked on their storage cradles, metal screaming against metal. It sounded like they were trying to break free, to rejoin their counterparts on the cables. The emergency phone rang continuously now, not in a pattern, but a constant, skull-drilling ring that seemed to come from every speaker in the building. And then the cables started running backward. This was physically impossible. The bull wheels were designed to turn only one direction. The entire mechanism would have to be rebuilt to reverse them. But I watched through the window as ascending cabins began descending, and descending cabins rose. The procession of ghost-filled cabins was now moving upward, against gravity, against logic, against reality itself. Through all of this chaos, I saw more and more passengers appearing in the cabins, not just from recorded incidents, but others I hadn't found in the files. Hundreds of figures in clothing from different decades. A woman in a 1960s dress, a man in a 1970s leisure suit, children in 1980s ski gear, modern tourists in current fashion. They filled every cabin on the line, all 72 of them. Though the math didn't work, there weren't that many recorded deaths. Then I understood. These weren't just the people who had died. These were the people who had almost died. Everyone who'd had a close call, a near miss, a moment where death had brushed past them on these cables. Part of them had been left behind in that moment of terror, and now those parts were riding, unable to get off. The control room door started rattling. Someone was trying to get in from outside. Through the reinforced glass, I could see William Crenshaw in his 1991 operator uniform, working the external override panel, trying to take control of the system. "Let me in," he shouted, his voice muffled by the glass. "I can fix this. I can save them this time. I know what went wrong." Rule 6 echoed in my mind. If the cables start moving backward, lock yourself in the office until dawn. I made sure the door was secured and backed away from the windows. Crenshaw pounded on the glass, his face twisted with desperate frustration. Behind him, I could see other figures approaching, past operators, maintenance crew who died on the job, all converging on the control room. The backward procession of cabins continued, rising impossibly toward the summit. The mechanical systems screamed in protest, gears grinding, motors smoking, cables stretching beyond their tolerance. The building shook as if it might tear apart. At 3:33 a.m., something new happened. All the cabins stopped at once, suspended between summit and base. For a moment, everything was still. Then, one by one, the cabin doors opened. All of them. 72 cabins hanging hundreds of feet in the air, doors wide open to the night. The passengers began to disembark. They stepped out onto nothing and walked on air. Hundreds of ghostly figures moving in procession down invisible steps. They descended toward the base station in neat lines, like tourists queuing for tickets. Men, women, children from across 6 decades of operation, all walking calmly through the sky. They gathered on the loading platform, filing into orderly rows. The 1978 ski team stood in front, still in their racing gear. Behind them, the ice storm victims, the blizzard evacuees, the heart attack victim, the suicide, all the recorded deaths I'd researched. And behind them, hundreds more, the near misses, the close calls, the ones who'd left part of themselves behind in moments of terror. They all turned toward the control room, toward me, and spoke in unison. "Let us complete the journey." Their combined voices shook the windows. The plea was desperate, mournful, angry, and hopeful all at once. "We never arrived," they continued. "We're stuck between departure and destination. Every night we try to complete the journey. Every night we fail. But you could help us. You could run the cables properly. You could bring us home." I understood what they wanted. They needed someone living to operate the system, to officially complete their interrupted journeys, to check them in at departure and check them out at arrival, to close the loop they'd been stuck in for decades. But I also understood what would happen if I did. The moment I participated in their journey, I'd become part of it. I'd join them in their eternal ride. Another operator trying forever to bring them safely home. "I can't," I said, though I knew they couldn't hear me through the glass. "I'm sorry, but I can't." The crowd of ghosts stood perfectly still for a long moment. Then the child in front, a boy from the 1978 ski team who couldn't have been more than 15 when he died, raised his hand and pointed at me. "Then you'll join us eventually," he said, his young voice carrying impossible weight. "They all do. Every operator, every maintenance worker, everyone who works these cables long enough becomes a passenger. The mountain doesn't let you go. You'll see." At exactly 4 a.m., everything stopped. The ghosts vanished like smoke. The cabins closed their doors and resumed hanging normally on their cables. The emergency phone went silent. The knocking ceased. The building stopped shaking. Even Crenshaw and the other operator ghosts disappeared from outside the control room. The only evidence anything had happened was the lingering smell of old snow and metal stress, and new entries in the logbook that I hadn't written. 3 a.m., all passengers loaded for special charter. 3:15 a.m., scenic route authorized by management. 3:33 a.m., unscheduled stop for observation. 3:45 a.m., journey incomplete, rescheduled for tomorrow. 4 a.m., system reset for normal operations. Below these entries was a list of names, hundreds of them, in different handwriting styles, different inks, some so faded they were barely legible. At the top was William Crenshaw, 1991. Below that, Rita Valdez, 2019. Tommy Hendricks, 2021. Sarah Brennan, 2023. And at the very bottom, in fresh ink that was still wet, Marcus Webb, 2023. My name, but I hadn't written it. I looked at my hands. They were translucent, like looking through frosted glass. I could see the desk through them. I touched my face and felt nothing. My hand passed through as if I wasn't there. "No," I said out loud. "No, I'm alive." I followed the rules. I stayed locked in until 4 a.m. A new voice spoke from behind me. I turned to see Sarah Brennan standing in the control room, though I hadn't heard the door open. You did follow the rules, she said sadly, but the rules don't save you. They just delay the inevitable. Every operator thinks they're surviving the night shift, but we're all just taking our turn as passengers who haven't realized they've already boarded. When? I asked, though part of me already knew. Your first night, the shock of seeing Cabin 13 move, the terror of those first moments. Your heart stopped at 12:03 a.m. Everything since then has been your journey, your loop. You've been riding the cables just like all of them, thinking you're still operating them. I wanted to deny it, but memories were surfacing. The strange looks from the morning crew who never seemed to see me. The fact that no one had called to check on me in days. The way the ghosts had looked right at me, recognized me as one of them. We all die on our first night, Sarah continued. The mountain makes sure of it. Heart attacks, accidents, sometimes just stopping. Then we spend our afterlife thinking we're still working, still following rules, still trying to save others from what happened to us. But we're all passengers now, Marcus. All of us, riding forever. I looked out at the cables stretching up the mountain. Dawn was breaking, painting the peaks gold and pink. Soon the morning crew would arrive, and a new operator would be hired. Someone else desperate enough to take a job with unusual pay and strange warnings. They'd receive a laminated card with 6 rules. They'd think it was hazing. They'd experience their first night of terror, and at some point during that night, maybe from shock, maybe from fear, maybe from something the mountain itself did, they'd die, and then they'd join us, thinking they were still alive, still working, still following rules that were really just the pattern of our eternal shifts. The cable cars hung silent in the morning light, but I knew that come midnight, they'd run again. Cabin 13 would descend with its 6 passengers. The emergency phone would ring, the cables would reverse, and I'd be here, playing my part, pretending to operate a system that was really operating me. Because what else could I do? I was a passenger now, had been from the beginning, and passengers at Whitecap Mountain never really get off. They just ride forever, hoping that maybe tonight they'll finally reach their destination. But the destination doesn't exist, never did. There's only the journey, repeating endlessly, and the mountain that holds us all.